that I felt so stupid. I felt dumb, like I felt like I was completely wrong. And that was only a bit of information that I got from her about that week.
So you said a lot more about Taylor's character behind her back. You called her abrasive for wearing her finale outfit. You told Terrence she was condescending and doesn't understand herself. You were in the room when Terrence called her a sellout, and you agreed she needed to be put in her place for making you feel like an idiot after the alleged Paloma lie. Did you ever consider telling Taylor any of these possibly hurtful things so she wouldn't be surprised later, given you guys became intimate later?
Sure thing. Yeah. And thank you for asking the question. I think that when I look back at the season, first of all, I've probably forgotten a lot of the things that I've said over the course of, what was it, 82 days in the house. And then also, I would say that in the heat of the moment, there's definitely emotions that are involved, the stress of the game, and also trying to figure out what's best to say in response to people is all being factored in based off of what game moves to help you survive, right? So I'll say that. And I'll also say that I've had conversations with Taylor about these sort of comments that have been made and whatever she has seen thus far. And we started to talk through where my head was at those times when I said those things. Also, becoming more aware of the things that I did not know were happening, like what the actual reality was for that first week for Taylor, which I was nowhere near aware of until after the show. So throughout that time, I think that while I was in the house, I knew that I definitely wanted to have those conversations with her. And I think you guys may have seen an attempt at that last week, right? To sort of bring up how I was feeling, sort of my sentiments towards, what I have come up with based off of my experience. And I think that unfortunately with being in the house and playing the game, it's still impacting the way that you view the conversation, right? Like how honest can you truly be in that moment when this is a very personal conversation that you're having versus how is this conversation maybe impacted by game? Like, will there be 100% transparency or will there be only 50% transparency because you have to say what you need to say in order to make sure that you're aligned with the people that you're aligned with and you're surviving that week and the following week to make sure you advance. So all of that to be said, it's a lot to consider, and it wasn't as straightforward as I wish it could have been.
Mm-hmm.
As in the outside world, if I really wanted to have that conversation, I think it would have been a lot longer and a lot more transparent.
You did bring up having tough conversations despite, it being able to affect your game in those final 2 weeks. One, you validating Taylor's mistreatment after she took the headphones and mentioned how long everyone has been away from their family. You said you would have reacted harsher if it wasn't for the cameras. Can you explain what you thought the appropriate private reaction was in that situation?
What the appropriate private reaction was, like
Yes,
what I
because
would
you
have
said
done.
you would have been harsher than you already were if it wasn't for the cameras. I think a lot of fans, specifically women, honestly, really want to know what that could have possibly meant.
Yeah, for sure. So I'll say in that moment, I was definitely emotional. I think I don't know how much of the context that people have over that day, but everything happened very rapidly, one thing after another, right? So, where I felt like, I was hurt by the comments that Taylor had made towards my goddaughter, I immediately went to put on my headphones and went to sleep. And then right when I, was woken up by her taking off the headphones, it was sort of like back-to-back things that had happened. And then I went downstairs to go change and do either workout or something. And then Brittany came down. She had I think she approached me about my nap, like how was my nap? And then, we talked about the whole headphone thing. And
Yeah,
then shortly after that,
fans definitely got to see the whole thing on live feeds. I think they just want to know what was that a harsher reaction you were alluding to.
yeah. Honestly, I'm not sure what I was thinking in that moment when I said that, to be honest. That could have been a very emotional comment. That could have been something that I just felt like, I felt hurt. So I wanted maybe her to feel hurt, unfortunately. And that was just a very immature thing to maybe say in that moment. And, I still haven't had a conversation with Taylor about that conversation. We've talked about other things earlier in the season, but I still do want to talk to her about, where I was heading and my mindset there. Because it was truly out of love. Like it truly was out of caring for that person and wanting to express how I felt, because if I didn't care, I wouldn't have said anything. I just would have ignored her and
Yeah.
moved on from there. So that's sort of my perspective.
Bright light of Taylor being on the show, she talked about colorism with you earlier in the season. And when you were talking to Taylor about how she was being perceived, she asked, why does Nicole and Amira didn't get the same treatment? You said you never got that impression from them. But Nicole and Amira put you in a tough spot in the storage room over evicting Pooch. Nicole flat out said, it's Pooch or it's you, which to me as a fan was pretty shocking. It's a bold move. That's a targeted statement that didn't get much of a reaction to you from you. What would you say to those that think the difference in your reaction to how you're treating Nicole and Amira, who basically threatened your game, and then to Taylor, who was actually working with you and got harsher reactions from you? I'm sorry, but I have to bring up it looks a little bit like colorist bias. What do you have to say in reaction to that?
Yeah, sure thing. I can only react with what I was thinking at that time, right? For me, I think that conversation with Nicole and Amira was definitely a shocking one and definitely made me very uncomfortable. I will never minimize that to say that, it wasn't aggressive in the way that they had approached that I mean, Amira was telling me, why do you keep throwing competitions? Just win a competition. Like, I talked to many people about that afterwards, and that was sort of the red flag that led us to believe that we couldn't necessarily work with, Amira at that time, and what made us think that, okay, there's something happening on the other side of the house that we're not a part of. Whereas I think, unfortunately, by virtue of more time, I've had more experiences with Taylor. I've had more time to connect with her one-on-one. And I think naturally, when you spend more time with one person, you're going to find different things that you'd want to address. And I think with Amira and Nicole, Amira was there for 3 weeks, Nicole was there for 4, whereas Taylor and I took it all the way to the end. And a lot of those conversations happened towards the end, right? And like I said, out of me being a caring person and wanting to express how I feel and in some effort try to help, I had that conversation with her towards the last week to just express how I felt. But I also knew and had suspicions that, okay, how much of this conversation is going to be tainted by game and saying what we need to say in order to advance our game. So that's my perspective on that. I truly did not and would never think that I would treat women of a different shade of color any differently. I mean, my mom's Puerto Rican, my dad is African American, dark-skinned male, and I have plenty of, family members who look like Taylor, who look like Nicole, who look like Amira. I come from a very diverse background, so it's hard for me to feel that way, that was a bias, but I'm also not neglecting that it could have been.
Okay. You mentioned to Taylor to watch the show back, and once she gets out, she can see how she's being perceived. Now that you're out in the world and you see how loved she is by fans and the cast, is there any reassessing on your part on your read on Taylor, or your push for her to believe the house's cold perception of her, or the read on your own personality to become more self-aware as you wanted her to be? Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, I think that there's definitely, like a more of an awareness of how she was playing her game throughout this entire time. When you're in the house, you have no idea what lying people are doing behind your back, what things are being said, and hence why it makes people react a certain way and do that same thing because they're trying to protect themselves. So I think, after seeing how much positive feedback she's been getting from this season, I become more aware of what she's gone through, which I did not know while I was in the house, and what led to her being a target that first week. I mean, my God, I even told her in the house when she had told me about some conversations she had with Paloma that I felt so stupid. I felt dumb. I felt like I was completely wrong. And that was only a bit of information that I got from her about that week. Seeing a lot of what was happening throughout other house guests isolating her. Especially when I think there was a women's alliance, the girls, that sort of kept her on the outs. Like seeing all of that or hearing about all of that play out gives me an entirely different perspective on where she was at throughout the game. And I've also apologized to her about a lot of the things that I've said, but also not understanding those things, right?
Mhm.
So to me, that was the biggest surprise to me, is just to see how much she had been through, and that her story when she had made that speech in finale night, how much it would resonate with people because of the fact that they know how much she's been through. So yeah, I'm much more aware of that now.
Mhm. My last question. After that breakup talk, Taylor was giving you the space that you asked for. Why did
Mm.
you decide to proceed further with that relationship if you felt so disrespected by her? And why did you say after the season you're still open to seeing where things go with her? Again, going back to you initiated the breakup. So.
Yeah. I mean, for me, like I said, that's just how I felt in that moment. And I also felt, all right, in order for me to do, like, a lot of this is, unfortunately, the game has to be factored in. If this was just a person to person outside of a game, I think things would have been handled a lot differently. But in that moment, I'm thinking about where I stand in the game and making sure that, all right, if I were to go into this season and think back, like, would a showmance ruin my chances of possibly winning and taking home the 750K? So when I thought about Turner, I looked at him and I was like, okay, he's picking up on the fact that, like, me and Taylor are getting closer. I need to make sure that I'm playing the best game that I possibly can to make sure that he doesn't believe that I'm not going to take him in a final two situation. So that's being considered. I'm also considering, like, my focus and what I believe is best for me. Like, I'm looking at how much time that I've spent in that house with someone, building a relationship, and then feeling as if, okay, well, if my mind is on that, but not on the game, like, how can I balance both? And I know that we're only going to be out of the house within 3 days, and we can chat about this further then. So to me, I felt like at that time, the conversations that I really wanted to have with her were only 3 days away. So why don't we take a pause and make sure that we're focusing on our games and making sure that we can do the best job that we can to advance, so that afterwards we can have those conversations and talk through, the reality of how I was feeling and not have any game influencing those conversations. So that's how I felt.
That's interesting. I think as a viewer, what I got from the situation, like game wasn't mentioned almost at all. And it wasn't like a pin in the conversation. It's like, this is how I feel now, gonna take a break. And like, I understand, and only
Mm-hmm.
as a fan, that the house is a pressure cooker.
Yep.
So I
Yep.
could see like there might be other outside stressor factors, but it's interesting to me now to hear that game was any part of it, because to be honest, it seemed like you felt like you were in a very powerful role. You had two allies with you at the end, and you knew that you had your pick, and you were very confident you can beat Turner. That's why you picked him over Brittany.
Mm-hmm.
Where I think Taylor had less power. And honestly, as a female viewer, I kind of felt bad that I felt, even if she felt like she could, like, should have stood up for herself, she really couldn't in that situation
Mm-hmm.
if she wanted to be taken to the end. But it's interesting that you're saying now you were putting game into that and saying it's a hold. We'll talk about it later, when it seems very definitive.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, in that moment, it's for me, Nicole, I'm looking at it as, why did I come here? Like, what is my main objective here? What am I going to be able to do with winning that 750K? And we get into those diary rooms and you start thinking about what is the impact of these decisions. And it's like, okay, well, I have to make sure that I am prioritizing my game. And maybe I didn't verbalize that in the show, but that was what I was thinking. And even if I did verbalize it, I don't know what was shown and what wasn't, right? Like, not only to the live feeds, but also to, the viewers of just the shows that air 3 times a week. So that's a perspective that I hope people can understand and appreciate, because I've talked to previous house guests, and how much that weighs into decisions is huge versus people who haven't been in the house and are looking at it as like, okay, these are two people and this is how I wish things would have played out. but the game always influences whatever you're thinking about while you're in the house. And for me, that was my main objective, was to make sure I can take that 750K back. So